Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Think Unbroken podcast. I'm your host, Michael Anthony, and our goal and company is to help you understand your past, get out of the vortex, and become a hero in your own story. My guest today is an advocate for mental health care, for learning, for sharing, for talking, for speaking, for writing, for being someone in the social space around mental health. Ladies and gentlemen, Emma Zeck. Emma, thank you so much for coming and being on the show with me.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, a little background I'll share before we dive in how I came across you. So, I spend a little bit of time on Instagram when I have some free time going through connecting with people who are doing what I'm doing in the space of being advocates against child abuse. And I came
Hmm.
across your Instagram and I was profoundly impacted because I thought to myself, oh, this is a person who is doing what I do in a different capacity, yet it's the same thing. Out here in
Hmm.
Asia, we have a saying, same, but different. So can you kind of talk me just through what happened, how you end up on Instagram, you're sharing your stories there, and a little bit of the why behind that?
Yeah. I feel like my story is super complex, but I'll try to do I'll basically just kind of sum it up as to why I decided to go public with basically my trauma, my past, yeah, my childhood, my abuse, everything that I've experienced. So I grew up in a really, really abusive household. I mainly took the brunt, or that's the right word, of the psychological abuse, but there was physical abuse, there was sexual abuse, there was any type of abuse that you could really think of. I also come from a family with money, so I grew up in a very white collar family. We were very wealthy. My name was really well known in the town that I grew up in, and we had a really great reputation, if you will. So with that, a lot of the time, anytime I would react to an abusive situation in my family, specifically towards my dad, was really the most abusive person. He would be like, "Shh, we don't talk about that," or like he would gaslight me and say that didn't happen. We don't want to like ruin the Zeck name. That's my last name. And so I just really was. I feel like a lot of my life, my voice was silenced. And recently my family has completely imploded. We probably went from 15 to 20 of us who were tight knit, even though it was abusive, we just didn't see it, to there's really only four of us that are really deciding to go into the pain and not repeat these not have another generation where we're all fucked up, for lack of better words.
Mhm.
So with that, my the four of us have sort of come into this just like awakening process and being like, damn, what the hell did we experience? That was not normal. We normalized it for so long. And so with that, I just feel like it has been so empowering for me to sort of go against my programming, if you will. My programming as in being told to be quiet and not talk about the abuse, and we don't want to ruin our family name because we're wealthy and everybody knows us. And so that's really what's inspired me, is to sort of just fight for that little girl, who was me, and fight for my siblings who were really, really abused by this family system. And I feel like me making it public is me drawing the line in the sand and saying this fucking stops with me. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's brilliant and very beautiful. And I think there's something also to be said here that that type of gaslighting or we don't talk about this or whatever that thing may be has no social economical boundaries because I grew up
Yes.
poor and homeless and we weren't allowed to say shit. And if we did, we probably were going to get our ass kicked even worse. So
100%.
I believe probably, and I would be, tell me if I'm wrong in guessing this, part of that journey for you might be taking your power back in a sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because my friend, one of my really good friends, she said it in the most caring way possible. But I want to write a book someday, and she was like, your posts, like I'm not being mean at all. And I asked her for advice, and she was like, your posts just seem really angry. And I was like, you're right, they are angry. My anger is valid. I've been told to not be angry my whole life because I just needed to shut up about it. And so I feel like, yes, I am letting myself sort of gestate in this space of being angry, because being angry and allowing myself to have those angry or rage feelings is what allows me to take my power back.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I luckily was in a men's group therapy when I lived in Portland, Oregon for a couple of years. And one of the guys one night goes, "You don't know how to be angry." And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I'm angry all the time." He was like, "No, no, no. You just don't understand what it's like to actually feel that emotion." I was like, "Holy shit." Well, I've changed
Mm-hmm.
because of that conversation, because our emotions are kind of stripped from us when we are young, and we're not allowed
Yeah.
to step into any type of ownership around who we truly are. Our wants, needs, and
Mm-hmm.
interests kind of get thrown out the window. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of take me back. Talk about childhood. Talk about what you come from. Just what's your earliest memories of childhood like?
Yeah. My earliest memories, I think just my childhood in general, when I think about it, I think a really good word to sum it up is just good words plural is chaos and confusion. There was my mom, so I'll back up. My mom was very codependent, and so she neglected her own needs in order to help and save my dad, my dad was just filled with rage. He was an addict of he had a plethora of addictions, just a lot of unhealed trauma from his parents, and so he was like the one that my mom was just striving to save and would neglect her own needs and neglect her children in order to just worry about what my dad was doing and try to figure out how to help him and how to save him and how to save their marriage. So my childhood was very lonely. There was a lot of physical abuse that I witnessed, specifically between my dad and my brother. My dad was always in and out of the house. He went to rehab a couple times. And as a young girl, I felt very, very neglected, specifically by my dad. I have a very, very large father wound. And with that, I always wanted him to see me and I always wanted him to validate me. And that was just not, my dad couldn't give that to me because he hadn't given it to himself. And so there's a lot that goes into it. My grandparents are also addicts and also have a lot of unhealed trauma that they passed down to my parents, who then passed it down to me and my siblings. So my grandparents were also highly, highly abusive. My grandma, I remember one of the first memories I have of her is her dog had puppies and I was so excited to hold the puppies and I accidentally dropped one. And I remember her grabbing me and shaking me and be like, "Shame on you, Emma, shame on you." So there
Mm.
was a lot of shame instilled in my family, a crap ton of it. And so yeah, I just feel like all the hallmarks of an abusive, chaotic household that you would think of um, happened in my family, and there was also a lot of fraudulent money things going on, and just a lot of crap.
Lot of chaos, and it's
Yeah,
like
a lot of chaos.
I relate to a lot of that, and it's like, okay, where's the bingo board for mental health care, right? And
Seriously.
I'm like, bingo, motherfucker, every time.
Yeah. It's freaking wild.
So that's clearly a lot of chaos to be involved in, especially at such a young age. Were you
Hmm.
cognizant of like this is not right when you're going through this in your adolescence?
Yeah, so it's really confusing because my mom basically was scapegoated by my dad and his parents because they were very abusive to my mom specifically and me and my brothers. And my mom would try to act out and be, or not try to act out, but she would react to their abuse and be like, "Guys, this is not right." But it's almost like she was outnumbered and they would gaslight her and be like, "No, you're the crazy one." And so my mom started confiding in me at a very, very young age. Like I remember when I was 7 or 8, I cussed out my grandma for the first time because my mom was like, "Your grandma's being mean to me," and all she just confided in me a lot of things that were too young for my brain to handle. So I was just like, "Fuck you, grandma! Like, what the fuck are you doing?" Just really sad when you think about it. So I think I was cognizant to it to some level. I knew that it was wrong, but then I saw my mom continue to choose those things, if that makes sense. I saw
Mhm.
her have after my dad's first affair, that was her first chance to leave. And instead of leaving, she decided to stay. And then after the second one. And so I knew that it was not normal necessarily, but I feel like I was forced to normalize it in order to survive, as a lot of children are.
Sure, absolutely. And it becomes
Yeah.
a coping mechanism for survival. Our
Hmm.
brain, the number one thing that we want to do is survive no matter what. And so we adapt. And sometimes
Hmm.
adaptation means going, okay, I guess this is just what it is.
Yeah.
So as you're in this and as you're experiencing these things, what is it like for you while you're at school, while you're in social situations, while you're with friends? What's happening in your life then?
Yeah, that's a good question because I remember a lot of times, like I said, in my small town in Kansas, my family was really well known. My dad owns a very successful car business in my hometown that my grandpa owned and my great grandpa owned. So my family has been in this specific town for generations. And it's a small town gossip, people talk. And so my dad, for example, one time like went to jail, or not, sorry, excuse me, he didn't go to jail. The police were called on him because he was abusing my brother physically. And that got back to some parents, of course, and it kind of started rumoring around this. I was in elementary school at the time, and I remember my friends' parents saying that they weren't allowed to hang out with me anymore because of the way my family was. And so it's so twisted because children are often forced to internalize their parents' abusive behavior. And it's like I almost don't blame the parents, but for them to like tell me that is like really shitty, especially as a child, because I'm like, what? Like, get me out of here. What can I do about it?
Hmm.
So I feel like in social situations, when I was younger, it was really hard for situations like that. But as I got older, it got better. And as we talk more, we'll sort of get into that, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. And I know how ostracizing and lonely it can feel, especially at that young of an age where you're
Yeah.
like, okay, no one sees me at home, but now no one sees me when I'm not at home. And so I'm
Hmm.
basically just the invisible kid rolling
Yeah.
around town.
Yeah.
So obviously you have a very interesting relationship with your father, a very interesting relationship with your mother. What's the connection like with your siblings?
Yeah. So, I have an adopted brother. He's my oldest brother. And unfortunately, I don't talk to him at all. My second oldest brother, we actually are living in the same house right now, and he is one of my best friends in the entire world. He has a wife, and my 2-year-old nephew, and we're all very, very close. And then my 17-year-old brother, actually just moved in with my dad, and I don't speak to my dad at the moment. And so that just sort of creates a wedge between us. But I think throughout my life, a lot me and my siblings have sort of been trauma bonded,
Hmm.
where we are like bonded in the chaos rather than like out of a stable, healthy connection. So my youngest brother is a little too young right now to really sort of. I mean, he's a senior in high school, so I don't blame him for not really wanting to like do inner work. But me and my second oldest brother and my sister-in-law are really trying to like sort of rewire our relationship at the moment and make it grounded out of a stable connection rather than out of chaos.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's
Yeah.
the same thing I'm trying to build with my siblings as well, because we were
Hmm.
all very much separated as a children, different foster homes for for one of my brothers, or
Mm-hmm.
state or city funded homes. My grandmother adopted me and one of my other brothers, and so we're just strewn all about Indiana, right? And
Hmm.
so our connection is probably very similar.
Yeah.
So now as you're starting to, for me, I didn't really notice that this didn't feel right until I hit my early teens, right? Because
Hmm.
I was just so used to, this is just the way it is. It's not surprising if my stepdad throws me through a wall or my mom steals, from the gas station or whatever. Like, this is just what we do.
Hmm.
When you started heading into your teen years, what was life like for you? What was happening?
Yeah, so heading into my teen years was interesting. I honestly get kind of confused when I think about this time because my family was seemingly very good during this time. My dad had gone to rehab and had worked on his problems, and I don't have a lot of memory of that time, to be honest. I think that has to do a lot of times with trauma victims. We just suppress things in order to survive. That's just what our brains do, coping
Totally.
mechanism. But things seemed good. It's really things got really bad again, if you will, when I graduated from high school. That's when I feel like that's when the brunt of my trauma happened. I don't know if that's the right word that I keep saying, but
Sure.
I
Yeah.
hope
Yeah.
so. It works. So I'm 23 years old now. I feel like the worst. My childhood was pretty bad. But the worst of my trauma happened between ages 18 and 22.
And I would definitely want to
Yeah.
dive into that, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you this question first. Do you
Yeah.
have any happy moments in childhood?
Um, it's super interesting because I really, you're not the first person. I've asked myself that multiple times, and I really want to look at my childhood like with a clear lens, and I feel like I'm having that clear lens now rather than looking at it through the lens of like my wounded inner child or through the lens of my pain. And I feel like every happy moment that I had was us, like for example, my dad would like go in a fit of rage and we would all kind of laugh at him and be like, "Oh, dad." So like things like that were like it was happy, but like it was because we were just all trying to like survive, if that makes sense.
Sure. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've recently come to the realization that there are no happy moments for me in my childhood. And I
Hmm.
think unfortunately that's just how it is for some people.
Yeah.
The word survival, I think, is resiliency and survival, they kind of go hand in hand.
Hmm.
What did survival look like for you while you were young going through this stuff?
Yeah. Survival looked like for me just being invisible. If I had too strong of emotions, I was psycho. If I asked for too much, I was needy. If I reacted to somebody abusing me, I was just a woman and I was sensitive and I was overreacting. So I think it was literally just staying visible and having zero needs and neglecting my needs in order to take care of my mom, in order to make sure that my brothers were okay, in order to make sure that my mom wasn't going to like fall off a bridge. Like just it was just a lot of yeah, like I said, being visible and neglecting my needs for sure.
So where were you putting your interests at? What were the things that you just kind of did for yourself as coping mechanisms as a kid?
Um, do you mean like negative or
No,
like
I mean, like, I'll
fun
give you an
things?
example. So, like, a lot of my childhood was spent reading, writing,
Mm-hmm.
playing video games, playing sports, doing all these things to keep myself either A, distracted, or B, as far away from the house as humanly possible. So,
Yeah.
what were the mechanisms that you were doing just to kind of exist?
Yeah. I played sports from a really young age. I was a competitive volleyball and then basketball player. Um, I feel like that's pretty much it. I've always been artistic, and like for example, now I'm a photographer, and I feel like I've always sort of been interested in those mechanisms. But I really wanted to be a professional athlete when I was older, so that was sort of my thing that I could exert all my energy to and make sure that I was perfect at, so I could get a college basketball scholarship and stuff like that. So sports were definitely my thing.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that helps so much. So, and a lot of that time in bonding, and I found like being on teams, being on
Yeah.
sports teams was such an important part of me just feeling not alone. Do you
Yeah.
relate to that at all?
Oh yeah, I miss playing basketball literally just for the camaraderie. Like I still like I have a Snapchat group with some of my teammates and like we'll just joke about stuff and I'm like, dang, I miss that so much. I miss just yeah, having that's like when you have a community around you and you're all working towards one purpose. I just feel like there's something really, really powerful in that I do miss a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get that. And that's why
Hmm.
one of the things I'm always telling people is like, you have to build your community now. If you
Hmm.
are in the healing process, if you're in the recovery process, like, no one is just going to hand you the tool book that says, hey, go hang out with these people and they're going to help be a part of your process. Like, you have to
Yeah.
seek that out. And especially as an adult. And that's so
Yeah.
much in our agency, which I want to talk to you about that more here in just a minute. So
Hmm.
now you're in high school. What's life like in your home during this window?
Yeah, so high school was fine. There's see I say it's fine, but then I can think back and there's a lot of really painful memories. Like I remember just um a lot of crying. It's hard because I don't have a ton of memory and I'm actually working with a therapist now to like sort of bring these memories back up so I can properly process them to heal from them. But there was just a lot of I feel like in my home the like hallmark of it was just psychological fuckery.
What
It
does
was
that
just
look like?
so it looks like gaslighting, deflecting, blaming other people, lie. There was so much lying. There was so much triangulation where like my mom would be like, Emma, can you tell your dad to stop treating me this way? And then I go to
Mhm.
my dad and be like, Dad, please stop yelling at mom. Like, please, it hurts her a lot. And he'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not yelling at mom. Like, she's the one that's crazy. So then like I just split and I'm like, okay, can I trust my mom? Can I trust my dad? I don't know. Sometimes I can trust my mom, sometimes I can trust my dad. Definitely can't trust myself. So just a lot of psychological manipulation. My dad would use money over, like hold money over our heads to control us. Just a lot of psychological abuse that went on.
Yeah,
It's interesting because it's very, very hard to detect. It's very hard to detect a lot of
well,
times.
well, yeah, it's like you can't see the forest for the trees. I
Absolutely.
look back at my childhood. I am the best liar you will ever meet in your life.
Yep.
And that is all generational. Like I learned that from my mother, I learned that from my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother, I learned that from my stepfather. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure they learned that from the people that raised them. And
Absolutely.
as an adult, I've had to make it my mission to like not be a fucking liar all the time.
Yeah.
And
Which is
and like
it's so hard to do. It's
yeah,
so hard because like I'm lying is a huge thing for me. Stealing was a huge thing for me.
same.
I don't even know if saw anybody steal in my life, but that was a way that I felt like I was in control.
Mm,
So just a lot of things. And I'm in a support group right now called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. And it's really wonderful. And in one of their like main pieces of literature, it talks about how like we really don't like we don't really have a choice until we start the recovery process. Like we are essentially doomed. I hate that word because it's such like a dark word, but for lack
mhm.
of better words, like we are, before we step on the path of healing and awakening to all of this programming that has been instilled in us, we're sort of doomed to just repeat the cycles without even really knowing why we're repeating them or how to not to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to take a deep dive into that with you, but in just a minute. So
Okay.
you said that and brunt is the correct word.
Yes. Okay.
It is applicable to this conversation.
Thank you.
You said that the brunt of your experiences in trauma happened, in your late teens, early 20s. Can you kind of
Yeah.
take us into that story? What happened? What was life like for you then?
Yeah. So to preface this, I didn't mention this earlier, but my mom was sort of sick on and off throughout my life, physically, mentally. We didn't really know what was wrong with her, and with that, she has had a handful of suicide attempts. And that happened in my childhood. Like one time, I remember. I don't know if this would necessarily be a suicide attempt, but it was just a fucked up thing. So I remember my dad was out of the house after he had left the second time. And because he was dating our nanny at the time. And so he left and was living with her doing his thing. And I come into my mom's room and I would assume I was probably between the ages of 9 and 12. I don't remember exactly when this happened, but I go into her room and she's passed out, like completely unconscious. And I don't know where my brothers were. My dad was gone. And so I was like, Mom, 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 wake up. She wouldn't wake up. And I remember sitting there the entire night, not knowing what was going to happen, not knowing she would kind of come to. And then I noticed that she had sleeping pills. And I was like, what are these? Like, I was like peeling her eyes back, like, what are these? And she was like, they're just sleeping pills. It's fine. And so just like really just chaotic things. She was really, really, really unhealthy. And I believe that was because she was being emotionally abused. So
Yeah, definitely. And I relate to that because I was the person who called 911 when my mom attempted suicide multiple
yeah,
times. Like I was the one who was there. And so
yeah,
like that's something you just don't fucking forget. So
you don't.
I
You don't.
totally I feel you. I'm sorry you had to experience that. I totally
Yeah.
understand what that moment is like.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's fucked up. And it's something that
Totally.
wish nobody ever would have to experience. So your question was how like sort of was the brunt of my trauma from ages about 18 to 22 or 19. I get messed up with numbers because again, my memory is still coming back.
Sure.
So I preface with that my mom was sort of really sick on and off throughout my life. So May of 2017, My mom thought she was going into liver failure, and I was living in Colorado at the time. Like I said, I'm from Kansas, and so I was away from my house, and I was living in Colorado, and my mom calls me and she's freaking out. She's like, Emma, I think I'm going through liver failure. And I was like, shut the fuck up. I was like, this has been happening for so long. I was like, you're a fucking liar. You're doing this to get attention, like whatever. Um, and my dad at that time was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Like, we need a break. This is too much, blah, 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 blah. And so I want to preface that I don't believe, I really genuinely think my mom was so sick because she was being emotionally abused, and because my mom is an empath. And when you're an empath and you are being abused in that way, you literally will go insane. And so my mom was really sick. My dad was like, I'm done. We can't do this anymore. I'm over it. And so that was the perfect time because they were moving out of my childhood home. My dad had bought a really nice house about 30 minutes away from my hometown. And he was like, while we're fixing the house up, you're going to go live with my parents in our hometown. And I'm going to go get an apartment in downtown Kansas City and just like chill and work on myself. And you work on yourself, and then we'll come back together. And so that whole summer of 2017, my dad, I like loved my dad because I started to see my mom as this manipulative bitch that I was like, you have taken my dad away from me my entire life. I was like, you just couldn't get over the affairs that he had. And so, and I was like, you confided in me all these things and brainwashed me to hate my dad and blah, 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 blah. So that whole summer, I really did not like my mom at all. I thought she was in and out of psych hospitals that summer too. And I was like, you need to just stay in there. And that sounds really bitter and harsh, but when you have experience, as I'm sure you can understand, like you're just like, I can't fucking do this anymore. Like, I love you, you're my mom, but like I can't.
Totally. My mom and your mom should have a party together.
Yeah. Cool though, because my mom is woke now, whatever that word means, and she's healthy and wonderful. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But so where was I? Oh yeah, so that whole summer, my mom was really sick, in and out of psych hospitals. I was like, you need to stay there. And my dad was like, Emma, I told you, like, your mom has been manipulating you. Like, she just couldn't forgive me. I'm a good dad. I've been doing the best that I can. And that summer, he was like partying in Vegas and like doing some weird things. Like I said, my dad has a lot of money, and he was like, Emma, last weekend I spent like $50,000 in Vegas. And I was like, cool, dope, that's sweet, like happy for you. So just like weird things. I was like, okay, that's kind of weird, but like I guess that's his lifestyle, whatever. So fast forward to Thanksgiving, my mom attempted suicide for the last time. I was in Colorado. I was at school at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I got a call from my little brother, and he was hysterically crying, and he was like, I found mom with sleeping pills. And after that, I was like, my mom called me on the phone the next day. She was like, Emma, I'm not crazy. I am not crazy. I promise. Because she somehow discharged herself from the psych hospital. And I was like, what are you talking about? Yes, you are. I was like, this has happened too many times. And I even said, I was like, when, and I honor myself where I was. This sounds very harsh, but it was where I was at the time. I was like, when are you going to stop trying to kill yourself to get attention? So that Thanksgiving, my family was not together at all. And I was like, fuck you, mom, I'm done. So fast forward to December. It's my birthday on the 21st of December. And my dad is like, hey, we're all supposed to be skiing in Colorado together. And because my parents own a house there, my mom was going to have to stay in a hotel though, because she was crazy. And then we were all going to get the house together. So my 22nd birthday, I think. And my dad is like, hey, like, I'm not going to be able to be there. I'll be there on the 23rd because I'm going to a Jay-Z concert in LA, with some friends. And I was like, cool. I love Jay-Z and I've never been to LA before. Can I go with you? And he was like, no, we don't have enough tickets. Sorry. So we're all in this ski town in Colorado hanging out. And my mom, just again, very intuitive, bless her fucking heart, followed her intuition, hired a private investigator. We found out that my dad had been dating a 23-year-old at the time, ever since he left my mom. And so that was absolutely, and he took her to the concert instead of me. So that was absolutely, utterly devastating, very confusing, because now we realize that he had been gaslighting us this entire summer and saying that my mom was crazy and saying that she's fucked up and he just needs some time to work on himself. All the while he's been taking a girl that's my age to Vegas to party with him.
Yeah. Now, were you more upset about finding this out about your dad or missing the Jay-Z concert?
Now I'm missing the Jay-Z concert at this point. I'm like, damn, really would have loved that.
Eventually, and you might relate to this, eventually you go, I'm not surprised.
Oh,
Right?
literally. But it's so now I wouldn't be. Now I'm not. But at the time, it was so like twisted where I was like, wait, but he said he was doing all this, and then what's even really really fucked up is that we're like, Dad, why you've been lying to us the whole summer? And he was like, no, when I started dating her is when your fucking mom tried to commit suicide for the last time. He's like, I can't deal with that shit anymore. Turns out that we had found photos of them from May together. So he had been with her all summer, but the way that he like twisted and manipulated it into making it my mom's fault was just what was really fucked up. And since then it's been this extremely excruciating process of slowly detaching from my dad, not him as a person, because I don't think anybody's a bad person. I think we're all wounded people in my experience, in my opinion. But detaching from his false self that he's living in, from this mask that he's wearing where he just dumps and projects his pain onto everybody around him and has no capability of looking at himself at all. I mean, there's a lot of, like, for example, in the following January, so like a month after that happened, I went to Italy with one of my friends, and the trauma, the psychological abuse that I experienced in December of just my dad was just lying and gaslighting us. And then it made me get in fights with my brother. And then I had such like a soft spot for my dad, and my older brother would be like, can't you see that he's manipulating you? And I'd be like, no, I don't think that he is manipulating me. And then I'm like, is he manipulating me? Like, it was just a mind fuck. So I went to Italy with one of my friends. My dad bought it for me for a birthday gift, which is so kind of him. And I had to come home 4 days early because my panic attacks were so severe. And just the nature of the trauma and the psychological abuse that I experienced specifically in that 2-ish week time period was really, really insidious. And then one more thing I'll add. There's a lot of situations like this, but I feel like this is sort of the most fucked up one. Two more things I'll add. I approached my dad's girlfriend after we kind of figured out who she is. Kansas City is a small city. I figured out who she is, had some mutual friends, got her phone number, and I took a photo of my family. I sent it to her, and I was like, hey, this is my family. Please stop seeing my dad. Like, you are tearing us apart. Like, you are not welcome here. Please. Didn't get a response from her. My dad calls me on the phone, and he goes, you fucking psycho. Like, my girlfriend is going to file a restraining order against you if you don't be careful. Like, you got to stop right now. And then I was like, Dad, what you're doing is hurting me. She's my age. Like, I feel so replaced and like not seen, and you lied to me. And I'm in so much pain from what you did. And he was like, that's not my problem. He's like, I'm going to date whoever the fuck I want to date. You have no control over that. And that's not my problem if you see, or if you perceive our relationship in that way. And then another thing, I wrote a letter to my dad, and it somehow got out into the public eye, and I don't know how it did. Again, I sent it to his email, and then somehow my brother and I both wrote letters, sent him to his email, and somehow the letters got out, and they got sent to like competing businesses with his business in my hometown. And then the next day we received a cease and desist letter from my father in our mailbox that said we would be sued if we didn't be quiet.
That must have fucking crushed you.
Yeah, it honestly, I don't want this to be a session of bashing my father, but I think it's him that has caused a lot of my trauma, but it's more so the family system that created him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things there's two things I want to touch on, and thank you for diving deep into that, because I know that I'm not the only person who's sitting here with you listening to this who relates to so many parts of these of your story. And I think there's two things really important that I want to touch on and get your thoughts on. One, first and foremost, is that trauma's generational. There is no question. You mentioned earlier that trauma begets trauma. Hurt people hurt
Mm-hmm.
people. I look at your father's tendencies as, dare I say, sociopathic, right? And I say that with the reflection of these were similar behaviors that I had in my 20s when
Mm-hmm.
I was on the deep end, when I was going to Vegas and spending $10,000-$15,000 a month, and like doing the craziest shit you could ever imagine because I felt nothing. I was so
Mm-hmm.
shut off emotionally. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized years later, looking back on it, I'm like, oh, actually, what's happening is I'm just hurt. I just need somebody to give me a hug. I need a space to exist. And unfortunately, that also involves like reflecting on yourself and coming to terms
Mm-hmm.
with the idea that you are hurt. And I think that's really hard for people in general, but men especially. The other piece that I want to touch on is I think that stepping away from parents is not a bad thing. And in America, especially, we live in a society that says your parents are your everything. They brought you into this world. You owe them life. You owe them everything. My opinion is you don't owe them shit. And
Mm-hmm.
additionally, you don't know anyone anything. Like it is not selfish for you to put yourself first when it comes to people interjecting their bullshit into your social life, into your mental life, your physical life,
Mm-hmm.
emotional life. When I was 18 years old, I told my mother I will never talk to you again. I just
Mm-hmm.
could not take any more of the lies, the suicide attempts, the rehab visits, the drugs, the alcohol, the hiding, the lying, the stealing.
Mm-hmm.
I was emotionally exhausted at 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And until the day she died, I didn't say another word to her. And unfortunately, a big part of that is like that's self-preservation, right?
Oh yeah,
And we have to
absolutely.
do that.
Yep.
So now you're in this amazing place, right? And I want to start jumping into the other side of this, the other
Mm-hmm.
side of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening in your, like, obviously panic attacks to leave Italy, that's a big deal. Like that's
Yeah.
like that. And if you haven't had a panic attack, if you're listening or watching this, it's literally like dying. um
Oh, it
Except you
was
don't die.
literally, and then you're like, oh shit, I'm still here. What the fuck was that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
It's horrible.
so you get back from Italy, you're back, all these crazy things, the letter, the cease and desist, life. I can't even imagine the stress on you. Like your hair must be falling out at this point.
My
So
hair actually is. So
yeah,
I'm not
I,
kidding.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
So what starts to happen? What's happening in your life where you're like, okay, actually, I need to seek help. I need to find support. I need to go towards me.
Yeah. So this it was sort of a slow process of me getting to the rock bottom that led me to that point. So I lived in Colorado while all
But
this was going on. Go ahead.
what did rock bottom look like?
Um, wanting to die, to
Mm.
be straight up. I felt so numb to myself and so devoid of any sort of semblance of hope and filled with so much grief because like I said, I didn't just have to cut off contact with my dad. I had to cut off contact with my dad, my grandparents. I don't talk to my brother. We have lost friends in this process. Like it is a lot of people. That's a whole nother story. But I was filled with I don't it was just depression, grief. I hated myself. I hated my life. I was so angry at my dad. I was so sad at the state of my life and my family that I had over the course of probably like 6-ish months, I would go in and out of just being like, I want to fucking die. And it would not to be morbid, but it would give me hope idealizing suicide because I was like, okay, I'm so miserable. I'm in so much pain that I could pull the plug anytime if I
Mm.
needed to.
Yeah, I relate.
Yeah.
I totally
Yeah.
relate. And I think a lot of people listening relate to that.
Yeah.
So what does pulling yourself out of that look like? You said it was a slow process, and I want to reiterate that to like it is a slow fucking process,
Oh
right?
my God. Yeah.
So what does this look like for you?
Yeah. Well, it's super interesting because I think that like if somebody would have approached me a year and a half, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, with like, hey, I really think this support group would benefit you. Like for example, the adult children of alcoholics support group that I go to now. I wouldn't have been in a place that was where I would have been receptive to that. So I think I had, because I was like, I'm fine. Like this, I didn't really have any idea that trauma was like stored in my body or any idea of generational trauma, or I really didn't even know that what my dad was doing was abusive because I was so just caught up in it. So excuse me, basically, what did you ask again?
Yeah, I was asking you
Sorry.
no worries. What was your journey like? This slow journey into healing. You mentioned rock bottom. What does it go? What happens from, okay, I'm rock bottom to I'm stepping into owning my trauma, owning who I am, doing the
Into
healthy
healing.
things. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. I hired a narcissistic. I believe my dad has some narcissistic tendencies. I'm not going to label him as anything. But when you are abused in a narcissistic way, it's a very, very, very psychologically damaging thing to occur. So I hired a narcissistic abuse recovery coach. She like specializes in codependency, which I definitely have experienced, and narcissistic abuse recovery. And so, with that, she was the first person in my entire life that made my healing my responsibility. She was just a guide for me. And I had been in therapy literally for 10 years at this point. And this was just 7-ish months ago that I worked with that lady. And I had been in therapy literally, like I said, for like 10 years and nothing ever fucking worked for me. Like I had done EMDR and that had helped. But other than that, now we know the science backs this up that when you just talk about your trauma, you're just re-traumatizing your brain. Like you have to energetically, yes, there is a time and place to talk about it. Absolutely not discounting that. But when you just continually talk about it and you don't literally like rewire your brain, it doesn't
Yep.
do anything.
Absolutely.
And so I was in that place. And so this coach that I hired was like, no, I'm not gonna, because and especially in America, we look at doctors to save us, and we look at like this pill that's gonna save us, and we look at this diet exercise program or whatever that's gonna save us. We don't ever take accountability for our healing.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that's what changed for me. That I was like, okay, I'm so fucking miserable. I literally hate my life. My dad, I don't feel like my dad loves me. What can I do? What are my options now? And I'd never really asked myself that. Like, how can I heal myself from this? How can I make it my responsibility? What are small actions that I can do every single day in order to start reprogramming my brain, in order to start like validating my trauma and sharing my story and healing my wounded inner child. And so with that, I feel like sort of what started this process, I broke up with, I was in a really abusive relationship this year, and I broke up with the guy. And after that, I was like, okay, I'm ready to fucking do this. And so I started meditating. I started attending that support group that I told you about. I make sure that, like, for me specifically, like, I don't eat any inflammatory foods, and that has been really healing for me. Um, I also listen to a lot of videos about like how to heal from trauma, and I just educate myself. I've read a fuck ton of books. Like I've just sort of been um rewiring. Like I keep saying the word rewiring, but that's really what it is. I've been fucking rewiring my brain.
Yeah, that's
So
incredible. And
yeah,
I think the two most paramount pillars of this journey are ownership. Like you have got to
yeah,
fucking want to do this. You got
yeah,
to stop playing the victim. You have to be like, I am willing to do whatever it takes to
yeah,
have my life.
yeah,
And secondly, you got to educate yourself,
yeah.
right? You have to understand. I think for most people, once we can have a rhyme and reason, it becomes so much easier to continue to move forward. So
Oh yeah,
when I read research studies or books or dive in, and I want to talk to you about that more, but I find that the more information that I know, the easier this journey becomes because I go,
one
oh,
hundred percent,
that's why I did that.
one
I want to
hundred
talk.
percent.
I want to come back though to you talking about the efficacy in having a coach because with what Think Unbroken is and what I do is that exact same thing as helping people find that thing for themselves, that
Mm-hmm.
ownership, leveraging their own power and stepping into who it is that they know they can be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go deep into that, but as a high
That's okay.
level, what do you think were the most important things? Actually, before I ask that question, what actually led you to seeking to find a coach or a mentor?
Well, I guess I didn't word that properly. My mom was in a pretty desperate spot, and actually, I believe it was divine, and a divine encounter. My mom is on all of these just support groups for women who have experienced psychological and physical abuse in a marriage, and the coach, the specific coach I'm talking about, my mom posted on a page, and the coach was like, "Hey, like, excuse me," just reached out to her and was like, "Hey, I'd love to work with you." And then my mom basically signed me up to work with her too. So
Got it.
I was not, I didn't even, I broke up with that guy. And it's funny because I broke up with him. And then like 2 days later, I was on the phone with the coach, with the lady that would be my coach, but I didn't know what to do. I knew that I was miserable and I fucking hated myself. And I kept attracting all of these really horrible experiences into my life. I don't want to say attracting. I believe that I was attracted to them because I was so used to just chaos and I was
Hmm.
addicted to it, as I'm sure you can relate to.
Yeah.
And I had so many addictions that I didn't even know what the fuck was wrong with me, nor did I know how to fix it. So she
Yeah.
kind of was just, she plopped into my life, if you will.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so now this person has magically imbued themselves into your life. Divine
Yes.
intervention or not doesn't fucking
Yeah.
matter. The point is that
Yeah.
they're there. And so they're there. This is happening. What is your experience? Like what is happening that has impacted you enough where you're like, "Oh, I can change the way that I perceive myself and the way that I can move forward in my life."
Yeah. Oh my God. For me, it was the support group that she basically told me to go to adult children of alcoholics. And she has like modules and she has an online course, and her content is basically sort of like based off of their work, the support group that I do. So their whole thing is healing your wounded inner child. And that when we experience trauma in childhood, we essentially like have to, our true selves have to hide, and we're living out of this false self that has to perform and like do everything that we like. Basically our false self came out in childhood in order to survive, and then it becomes a maladaptive coping mechanism as an adult because we don't know how else to be. And so we approach all of our adult experiences through the lens of this wounded inner child. And so, oh my God, that was just fucking revolutionary for me because I thought I was just a shitty person. I was like, why the fuck am I addicted to porn? Like, why do I attract really abusive relationships? Like, why am I addicted to all these things? I don't know. I also had a religious background, and I was like, damn, I just must be a fucking shitty person because I was always told like that's just sinful and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And this freaking support group has been wonderful for me. I could not recommend it more because it told me that like it's not me that like is the bad person. I just have this programming. I have this way that I was conditioned in order to cope with my intolerable reality. So it's not me, it's my programming, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And, it's part of rewiring your brain, exactly like you
Mm-hmm.
said. And that can't happen until you can understand what mechanisms of it are faulty.
Yep.
And, when you look back, there are so many people who struggle with porn addiction, food addiction, buying new shoes, whatever that thing is. There's so many people and they don't realize or recognize the why. But I think once
Mm-hmm.
you can figure out the why, everything begins to change.
100%.
You're obviously here at the beginning in stepping into something really palatable and incredible. I have found strength for myself as a writer, as someone who's written my entire life, not only in writing my book, but in also writing posts and creating my story and putting it out there, that I feel a huge weight lifted off of my shoulder. Now that you're stepping into sharing your story, can you kind of talk about that process, how you decided to make that choice? That is so difficult. And I commend you for it because that is one of the most vulnerable things that you'll ever do. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life was put a post on Facebook that said, "Guys, my shit is fucked up."
That's so awesome though. Like how fucking cool, because that like enables other people. Like you know that poem by Marianne Williamson where it's like our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. You know that poem?
Yeah. Yep.
And at the end she's like, as we are liberated from our own fear, our fear like basically like liberates others. And that's cool because you may not even know, but I guarantee you somebody was like, holy shit, Michael's owning his stuff, I can do that too. Like that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so why did you decide to start sharing your story?
Yeah. I honestly don't think I ever made a conscious decision where I was like, I'm going to share this. I'm going to do it. I've always been a writer. I've always, like I said earlier, I've always been creative. Photography and writing have always been sort of my outlets. I don't know. There is something in me that wants to crush this generational trauma so badly that I have to be vocal about it. Like, and it's not that like I always feel really empowered when I do it. Like off, like for example, today I wrote about a very personal story that I actually spoke on earlier about me being gaslit, and I immediately felt shame afterwards. I was like, damn,
Mm.
like should I have not shared that? Like I literally started sweating. I really noticed what my body was doing, and I was like, what is this about? And I was like, this isn't my shame. This is not my shame. This is the old programming that where I hear my family's voice and they're like, we don't talk about that. People can't know what's really going on. And so I feel like for me, just putting my story out there and owning it, it's bringing darkness and it's bringing light into dark places, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine and I do understand what it's like for people to relate and say, "Hey, thank you so much for sharing that." And
Mm-hmm.
I also realize that it can be a bit overwhelming as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, as you're doing that, what do you think for me, I'll give you an example. Like I just felt weight lifted from my shoulder. I felt a sense of relief. I felt empowerment, and when you step into that, I feel like it just kind of changes who you are as a person innately. Have you
Mm-hmm.
felt, what do you think is the biggest change that you've experienced as you started your journey, as you started sharing, as you go to support groups, as you have a coach? How do you look at yourself in the mirror today versus a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Um, hmm, there's so many things that have changed. I think that the biggest thing that has probably changed for me is knowing that I am not doomed. My life is not doomed. There's nothing wrong with me. I just have a computer virus, if you will, of this trauma and of this programming and of this toxic, oppressive energy that I grew up under. So I think being able to be like, that's not my shit. I believe everybody at the core is whole. I believe everybody at our core is at our core, excuse me, is full of peace and is our beings of light. And I think we just get into a world where there's a lot of pain, and we just, like I said, become programmed with all of this shit that's not really our shit. And so I think being able to differentiate that and be like, a lot of the stuff that I'm carrying, a lot of the crappy things I believe about myself, a lot of the shame that I have is not really mine. And sort of being able to like hand that back to those people energetically. And as I'm doing that, I'm stepping more fully into who I was all along.
Mm.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
totally. That's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about what your day-to-day life is like now. What are the practices that you have? What are the principles you're living your life by? Because I think for me, one of the biggest changes that happened in my life was when I started adapting and adopting daily healthy habits. And they're not
Mm-hmm.
always daily now, but like there's still support tools. So what are the support tools that you've created for yourself that are part of your day-to-day life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I first thing I do, I have a little ritual that I do in the morning. I'm kind of a hippie, so I the first thing I do when I wake up is I'll go let my dog out and make some like lemon with tea with cayenne and apple cider vinegar and stuff in it. And then I come back to my room and I do a grounding meditation, just to sort of like center myself, ground myself. And then I smudge just to like cleanse my aura. You're like, you're a freak. I told you I'm happy. Cleanse myself, just cleanse my aura, cleanse negative energies. So again, just to sort of center myself. And then I practice a Kundalini yoga meditation. I don't know if you're familiar with Kundalini at all. I don't remember which one it's called. It's like the Satanama that you like do with that. Practice that. And then I do 2 energy healing techniques on myself every morning. One is called EFT, it's the emotional freedom technique. And then the second one is called the emotion code. And it's again, they're both essentially, for lack of better words, just like releasing trapped emotions, if you will. So those are things that are non-negotiables for me right now. If I can't for some reason I wake up late or I go to bed really late, can't get them done in the morning, I like hold myself accountable to do them at night. So those have been really, really powerful in me. Just again, my whole life I've been chronically trained to neglect my own needs. So at first I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to go like do something else. But being like, no, this is what we're going to do. Like, this is what we're doing. We're showing up for ourselves. We're retraining our brain. So
yeah, and that amount of responsibility that you take for your own health is going to be what differentiates you being successful and moving forward in your life, or you being trapped in the vortex and being stuck in this mindset of the past and the ways that you were impacted. So, these are such amazing, great tools. And I think a lot of people are looking for a starting point and where they begin and how to keep going when things get difficult. What are the tools that you have in your tool belt right now that help you when you get triggered, when you've been gaslit, when you have found yourself with your back against the wall or you've fallen down? Because most people, and I want people to understand this really innately, like, you are going to fall back down. It's just going to happen. You are going to have setbacks. Like, no one is going to continue to always be on this straightforward trajectory. Just not how it works. So what are the things that you implement in your life now when you do have missteps, when you do fall back down, when you have to pick yourself back up?
For one, I don't engage with people who treat me like shit. I think that's
number one.
A really important thing. I think sometimes people will be like, why do I feel so shitty? Why am I not making progress? Why am I not healing? I'm like, are you still engaging with people who are abusing you? Because unfortunately, like I firmly believe, I feel like this is a pretty black and white thing. Most things are not black and white. This is probably one of them where you have to step away from the abuse. At least, even if, say, you're in the same house with somebody that's abusing you, you have to create some sort of boundaries in order to get some sort of clarity, if that makes sense. So I would say, one, if you can help it, do not engage with people that abuse you. Secondly, another tool that I have would be like, for example, if I get triggered, I could just perform EFT on myself, the emotional freedom technique, to release. Essentially, you're basically going in energetically and releasing emotions, because emotions are energy in motion. So it's just sort of, I don't know really how to explain it without like really explaining exactly what it is, but it's just a way for, like, if I'm feeling anxious, I can just do it on myself really quick and then it'll go away, which is really cool. So, and then another thing is allowing myself to have those hard days. I don't believe that, and that's what you were like alluding to, is that just because you have a really hard day or you like feel like you're falling back into that old programming, it doesn't mean you haven't made any progress. You're a fucking human and you're allowed to have those hard days. For example, the other day I was laying on my bedroom floor right over there and I was like, I feel like shit. And I was like, I don't want to do anything. I don't really want to do the work right now. I don't want to read my book. I don't want to journal. I don't even want to do EFT. And I was like, I'm just going to let myself feel like shit. And obviously not letting myself feel like shit to the point where I'm like neglecting myself for 3 days and I haven't showered or whatever. But like, I let myself have a night where I was like, I'm just going to let myself feel what I'm feeling.
Yeah. And that's brilliant.
And obviously let yourself feel what you're feeling at all times. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's difficult because I think that, and especially for me in the beginning of my healing journey, we're talking years and years ago, I would kick my own ass if I weren't doing all of the things. And I just want people to understand, like, you don't have to do the Kundalini, you don't have to do the yoga, you don't have to do the meditation, you don't have to do the journaling, you don't have to do the running the marathon. And I think we live in this weird time in society where people think you have to do fucking everything, and it's not that. Sometimes you can just have a bad day.
Totally or you can have a bad week. Like, it's okay as long as you, like, I feel like those times are becoming less and less for me, and I'm sure they'll become less and less for others, but like, as long as you just get yourself back on the path at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, like, you're okay. It's okay to be where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we also have to be okay with being okay. Like, sometimes you're just going to be like, okay, it doesn't have to be extra or not enough.
That's
right?
So true.
Yeah. You just got to be like, oh yeah, I'm okay. That's it. Leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Like, there's no impending danger. Like, things are really just cool.
Yeah.
Kind of weird, but it's true.
And if you can get to that place, there's an airy calm that comes along with it that I think is much deserved for so many people.
Absolutely.
So, Emma, this is amazing. Thank you again so much. There's so much amazing relation that's happening here, and I know other people are going to get that too. Before I ask you my last question, can you tell everybody where they can find you online?
Yes, I'm basically just on Instagram right now. My Instagram name is Emma, EMMA, the letter C, for Catherine. And then Zeck, my last name is Zeck, Z as in zebra, ECK. So just Emma C. Zeck
Amazing.
is the name.
Emma,
Yeah.
thank you so much, guys. And please make sure that you go follow her. What she creates and what she puts out is empowering. It is, and I want to say inspirational, but I hate that word so much. But it's so good. It is like, just go and see what she does, please. So, Emma, my last question for you is like, what does it mean to you to be unbroken?
Ooh, that's good. Unbroken. I feel like there's a couple ways I could go with this. I think being unbroken is allowing yourself to exist in each season that you find yourself, um, and honoring wherever you find yourself. At the same time, dang, this is a good question. I had it really like thought out in my head, and I'm like, unbroken. Give me a second. Yeah, I think just like honoring yourself where you're at, knowing that like you, even though you may feel broken, again, it's not you, it's your programming. If you have trauma, you're not a broken being, and healing is very, very possible. So I think it's just staying in like a state of hope and knowing that there is hope. And trust me, like if I could tell anybody, I literally have been in a place where I did not want to live and I pulled myself the fuck out of it. And if I can, you can too. I promise.
Amazing. Emma, thank you so much. Guys, amazing conversation with Emma. Please take time, listen to this once, twice, check her out on Instagram. And until next time, my friends, be unbroken. See you.